Welcome! You're listening to the Uncharted Lancaster podcast, where we explore the hidden histories, forgotten places, and long-buried secrets of Lancaster County. Using modern digital storytelling tools, each episode brings a new piece of local lore to life, revealing the strange, the surprising, and the stories history left behind. Let's begin.
So, picture this. You're driving down this seemingly mundane stretch of road in Lancaster County.
Right, just a totally normal drive.
Exactly. Specifically, it's Pennsylvania Route 441 in this little place called Washington Borough. And, heavy traffic is just whizzing by you.
Yeah, people are just going 60 miles an hour, not even paying attention.
Right. And there is no sidewalk there. None. In fact, if you actually want to stop and look at the only historical marker on this stretch, you have to use extreme caution.
Oh, absolutely. You're just standing there on this grassy roadside verge hoping you don't get clipped by a car.
Yeah, exactly. And what actually marks this spot, it's just a simple, almost rusted sign indicating the 40th parallel.
Just an invisible line of latitude.
Right. To the casual traveler passing by, it means absolutely nothing.
It's a sign on the side of the road.
But that stack of sources you sent us, we are talking historical deposition records, colonial letters, recent archaeological surveys. They reveal that this unassuming roadside verge was the epicenter of something massive.
It really was.
It was the center of an 8-year blood-soaked colonial border dispute. And I feel like we tend to look back at colonial history and just imagine it as neat and orderly.
Oh, for sure. We picture polite gentlemen in powdered wigs. Right?
Exactly. Just drawing elegant borders on parchment in a London sitting room while sipping tea.
But the reality, as we see in these documents you provided for this deep dive, is vastly different. Because what happens when those elegant borders drawn on parchment completely contradict the physical reality of the American frontier.
You get total chaos.
You get chaos. You get violence. You get a conflict known as Cresap's War.
Or the Conojocular War, right?
Right. Named after the Conestoga Valley, where much of the fighting took place. We're basically looking at a scenario where a massive geographical map error almost triggered a full-blown civil war between Pennsylvania and Maryland.
And this is long before the United States even existed.
Decades before. And at the center of it all is this larger-than-life figure, a guy known to his enemies as the Maryland Monster.
The Maryland Monster. What a title.
Right. But it's really crucial for us in this deep dive to examine the perspectives of both the Pennsylvanians and the Marylanders without taking a side.
Because both sides had completely valid reasons for what they were doing based on the paperwork they had.
Exactly. To understand the violence that erupted here, you have to understand the very real, very desperate economic and political motivations driving both colonies.
So to understand why people were eventually, shooting at each other over a Pennsylvania wheat field, we have to start with that foundational paperwork.
We have to go back across the Atlantic.
Right. Back to overlapping royal land grants. So according to the colonial charters and the sources, in 1632, King Charles I grants Lord Baltimore a charter for the Maryland colony.
And this charter strictly defines Maryland's northern edge at the 40th parallel.
Which seems pretty straightforward.
On paper, it is entirely straightforward. Lord Baltimore possesses a legal document from the King of England saying, hey, your territory ends at the 40th parallel.
But then the complication arises, nearly 50 years later?
Yeah, in 1681. A new king, Charles II, grants a charter to William Penn.
Okay, and this is where it gets messy.
Deeply messy. This charter defines Pennsylvania's southern border in a really convoluted way. It dictates that the border is a circle drawn 12 miles from a town called Newcastle.
Which is in present-day Delaware, right?
Right. And then from that circle, it extends northward and westward to the beginning of the 40th degree of northern latitude, and then straight west.
Okay, hold on. I need to pause here because the context of this transaction between the king and William Penn is just wild.
It really is an incredible piece of history.
William Penn's father was Admiral Sir William Penn, right? A Royal Navy officer.
Yes, a very prominent one.
And during the English Civil War, which is the conflict that literally resulted in the execution of King Charles III, Admiral Penn served the Parliament.
He did. He fought on the side of the people who executed the king's father.
Okay, so why in the world would Charles II hand over a massive chunk of North America to the son of a man who fought for the regime that killed his dad?
It comes down to cold, hard cash.
Of course it does.
Yeah, and the realities of a bankrupt monarchy. By the time Charles II is restored to the throne, the crown's finances are in absolute ruin.
They're just totally broke.
Broke. And the king actually owes the late Admiral Penn a staggering sum of money for unpaid loans and naval salary.
How much are we talking?
Something in the neighborhood of 16,000 pounds.
Oh, wow.
Which was an astronomical fortune in the 17th century. And the king just cannot pay it.
So the younger William Penn, who, by the way, happens to be a dedicated Quaker and a strict pacifist, is granted this massive tract of North American wilderness just to settle the debt.
Exactly. The king names it Penn's Woods, or Pennsylvania. It is honestly a brilliant move for Charles II.
Because he pays off a crippling financial debt with land he has never seen, and it costs the treasury absolutely nothing.
Precisely.
So he just draws a new box on a map and hands it over. But this is where the limitations of 17th century technology create a disaster.
A total disaster.
Because they didn't have GPS, they didn't have satellite imaging. How did they actually figure out where these lines were supposed to go on the actual Earth?
They relied on maps that were, frankly, speculative works of art rather than precise geographical documents.
That sounds dangerous.
It was. The map makers of the era relied on dead reckoning, primitive astrolabes, and reports from explorers who were often just guessing distances.
Just guessing.
Pretty much. So when King Charles II and William Penn were looking at the map in 1681, they genuinely believed that the town of Newcastle was located on a specific line of latitude.
Okay.
But later, more accurate surveys proved that Newcastle was actually a full 25 miles further south than everyone assumed.
Wait, 25 miles? That is a massive discrepancy when you are drawing the borders of a civilization.
It changes everything. Because of that mathematical error, the 40th parallel didn't just, brush the bottom of Pennsylvania as they had intended.
Right.
The actual true 40th parallel ran well north of the proposed capital city of Philadelphia.
Okay, I want to make sure I am really grasping the scale of this.
Yeah, let's break it down.
If Maryland's 1632 charter held up to the letter of the law because their charter explicitly claimed everything up to the 40th parallel, then the city of Philadelphia itself would legally be located inside Maryland.
Precisely. Philadelphia would be a Maryland city.
That is insane.
And Pennsylvania authorities realized this impending disaster almost immediately once better surveyors arrived on the continent.
They must have panicked.
Well, total panic. They realized they were building their entire colony, their capital city, and their major ports on land that legally belonged to Lord Baltimore.
So what do?
To prevent losing their capital, Pennsylvania tried to propose a highly complex geographical workaround. They argued for drawing the border near 39 degrees and 36 minutes.
Essentially trying to mathematically compensate for the map error just to keep Philadelphia in Pennsylvania.
Right. But Lord Baltimore, understandably, refused to give away 25 miles of his colony just because the Penn family made a cartographical mistake.
I mean, you can't blame him.
Not at all. And this standoff created a 28-mile wide strip of disputed territory.
It is, it's like two people buying the exact same piece of real estate because the title company used a 50-year-old broken compass.
That is a perfect analogy.
But here's the thing that always confuses me about colonial disputes like this.
What's that?
Why couldn't the two governors just sit down like reasonable executives, hire a modern surveyor, split the difference, and avoid a literal war?
Because land wasn't just dirt. Land was the fundamental economic engine of the colonial system.
Right.
Specifically, it was about a mechanism called quit rents.
Quit rents. Okay, explain how those work.
In this era, when a proprietor like the Penns or the Calverts granted land to a settler, they didn't just sell it outright and walk away.
Like a modern real estate transaction.
Exactly. It wasn't like that.
Yeah.
The settler had to pay an annual fee, a quit rent to the proprietor forever.
Forever?
Forever. It was a remnant of the feudal system, acting as an early form of perpetual property tax.
Oh, wow. So neither the Calvert family nor the Penn family could afford to back down because giving up that 28-mile strip meant losing immense perpetual wealth.
Immense wealth. And it also meant losing strategic positioning for the incredibly lucrative fur trade with Native American tribes.
Ah, the fur trade.
Yeah, and it meant losing future expansion rights westward. To yield the Susquehanna River region was basically to kneecap the future economy of their respective colonies.
So kings, charters, and perpetual property taxes, these quit rents, they are the bureaucratic kindling here.
The perfect storm for a conflict.
But, an argument in a London courtroom doesn't just spontaneously start a war. To understand how this turned into physical violence, we have to look at what happened when actual people started moving into this 28-mile gray zone.
The settlers on the ground.
Right. Because the 40th parallel lay north of Philadelphia, Maryland strategically focused its claim on the sparsely inhabited lands west of the Susquehanna River in a place called the Colonial Valley.
Maryland officials were smart. They recognized they couldn't easily march an army into Philadelphia and demand taxes without causing an international incident.
That would bring the king's wrath down on them immediately.
Exactly. So they targeted the frontier. They wanted to establish a foothold where Pennsylvania's grip was weakest.
But Pennsylvania had the exact same idea, right?
They did. In 1726, an English-born Quaker leader named John Wright settled near the river.
Okay, John Wright.
Right. And his associates looked at the geography and realized that if settlers were going to push west, they needed a way to get across the Susquehanna.
Which is a really wide, treacherous river.
It is. So Wright built 2 medium to large dugout canoes and started a rudimentary passenger ferry service.
See, when I hear ferry service, I'm picturing modern ferries with, cars and coffee shops.
Oh, no, not at all.
What did a ferry operation actually look like in the 1720s frontier?
It was grueling physical labor. These were not flat-bottom barges. They were massive tree trunks.
Just hollowed out trees.
Yeah, often 40 feet long, hollowed out by fire, and adds this in the Native American style. Wright and his men would pole and row these massive, heavy logs across a river that was known for sudden floods.
And hidden rocks.
Hidden rocks and treacherous ice in the winter. And they were moving people, livestock, and wagons piece by piece across this river.
That sounds exhausting.
It was, but it was essential. By 1730, traffic had grown so much that Wright applied to Pennsylvania for an official ferry license.
And this single piece of infrastructure triggered a massive demographic shift, didn't it?
It really did.
Yeah.
The promise of reliable transportation brought a significant influx of what we now call Pennsylvania Dutch, meaning German immigrants.
Right.
They started pouring across the river to set up farms on the West Bank.
So John Wright opens a business, and suddenly German farmers are just pouring into the disputed territory. And Lord Baltimore, sitting over in Maryland, starts to panic.
Total panic.
Oh.
He sees these farmers establishing themselves, and he realizes he is losing demographic control of the region.
He can't collect his precious quit rents if the area is entirely populated by people who firmly believe they live in Pennsylvania.
Right. He needs a way to force the issue. And this is a classic geopolitical strategy, establishing facts on the ground.
Facts on the ground.
You don't just argue about a border in court. You move your people into the disputed zone. That way, when the lawyers finally arrive, you can point and say, look, my citizens live here. They pay taxes to me. Therefore, it is my land.
Okay, so to execute this, Maryland needed their own man on the ground.
They did. And they recruited a Yorkshire-born frontiersman named Thomas Cresap.
The Maryland monster enters the story.
Here he is. Maryland granted Cresap a 500-acre tract of land right on the west bank of the river, a place he called Pleasant Garden.
And it is worth noting, according to the sources, much of the land Maryland promised to Cresap was already inhabited by those German settlers who had crossed on Wright's ferry.
That is the crux of the tension right there. Maryland intentionally overlaid their land grants right on top of Pennsylvania settlers.
Wow, talk about a recipe for disaster.
Furthermore, Maryland authorized Cresap to open a rival ferry at a spot called Blue Rock.
Which is directly challenging John Wright's operation, just 4 miles up the river?
Just 4 miles.
Yeah.
Cresap wasn't just sent there to row a boat, though. He was sent to act as an aggressive land agent and tax collector.
He's the enforcer.
Exactly. He immediately began visiting these German settlers, who, keep in mind, had hacked a clearing out of a dense forest and built their cabins with their own hands. And he tries to persuade them or intimidate them into purchasing their farms from him.
So he's saying, pay me, not Pennsylvania.
Right. He promised them that if they paid Maryland quit rents, he would secure them official ironclad Maryland land titles.
Okay, so how does Pennsylvania respond to a Maryland agent trying to flip their settlers?
Pennsylvania responds with an administrative countermeasure that really highlights the absolute mess of colonial law.
Because they couldn't just give out deeds, right?
No, they couldn't. Because of a previous royal proclamation, Pennsylvania couldn't legally grant full land titles in that specific area yet.
Why not?
They hadn't formally purchased the land rights from the Native Americans, specifically the Six Nations of the Iroquois.
So they didn't even legally own it yet themselves. in the eyes of the crown.
Correct. So Pennsylvania authorities started issuing what they called Blunston licenses, named after the magistrate who issued them.
Blunston licenses.
These were essentially government IOUs. They were pieces of paper promising the settler that they would eventually get a proper title to the land once Pennsylvania bought it from the Native Americans.
The situation for these German settlers is just bizarre and incredibly stressful.
It's a nightmare for them.
Like, you are a farmer. You've traveled across an ocean to escape poverty or persecution. You are literally just trying to grow some wheat and survive the winter, and suddenly you are caught in the middle of a bureaucratic tug of war.
Just trying to feed your family.
Yeah. You have Thomas Cresap demanding you pay him Maryland taxes in exchange for actual land deeds, and you have Pennsylvania magistrates handing you a literal IOU and telling you to hold the line.
And we really need to look at the profile of the man Maryland chose to enforce their side of this. Thomas Cresap was not a gentle diplomat.
Definitely not.
He wasn't a trained lawyer either. The historical records describe him as a hired ruffian, an Indian trader, and a soldier.
And there's a very revealing detail in the sources regarding his past, right?
Yes. Prior to coming to the Susquehanna, he had been involved in a land dispute in Virginia where he literally cleft an assailant with a broadaxe.
He hit a guy with a broad axe.
He did. He was a rugged, uncompromising, physically intimidating enforcer.
He was exactly the kind of man Lord Baltimore needed to stake a physical claim in a hostile environment.
Exactly. Placing a heavily armed, combative Maryland loyalist directly next to Pennsylvania settlers holding meaningless IOUs for the exact same land was a powder keg.
It was only a matter of time before someone lit a match.
And that match is struck in late October of 1730.
Okay, the river hijacking. We have a deposition from Cresap himself detailing what happened here.
We do. He is operating his ferry at Blue Rock. He and his workmen hear a hail from the East Bank.
Right, 2 Pennsylvanians are standing there requesting to cross.
So Cresap and his man row their dugout canoe over, pick the 2 men up, and start heading west across the Susquehanna.
Just a normal ferry trip.
Until they get about 60 yards into the river. Suddenly, the 2 passengers pull their guns on Cresap and his workmen.
It is a literal hijacking in the middle of a freezing river.
And the sheer physical danger of this cannot be overstated. A dugout canoe is unstable at the best of times.
Right, you stand up too fast and the whole thing flips.
Exactly. But Cresap doesn't surrender. He fights back using his heavy wooden rowing oars as weapons.
Just swinging these massive oars at guys with guns.
A violent struggle breaks out on the boat. Both Cresap and his workmen end up thrown overboard into the freezing water.
Oh my God.
They are clinging to the side of the wooden canoe, just trying to keep their heads above water. One of the attackers actually tries to pry Cresap's freezing hands off the wood to let him drown.
That is attempted murder.
Yes. Cresap yells out, asking if they intend to murder him, and one of the Pennsylvanians swears that he does.
Wow.
And we learn later from the depositions that the real target of this attack was likely Cresap's workman.
Oh, really? Why?
The workman was allegedly wanted by a Lancaster County landowner for unpaid debts. The attackers haul the workman away in the boat, essentially leaving Cresap stranded in the middle of the river to die.
That is so cold, literally and figuratively. But Cresap eventually drifts to a shallow area, right?
Yeah, he gets stranded on a large rock in the river for several hours.
And is finally rescued by a friendly Native American who happens to be passing by.
Thank goodness.
Now, I have to stop here because the entire narrative of this conflict paints Cresap as the villain, the Maryland monster.
That's the reputation.
But he was just hijacked on his own boat, thrown in a freezing river, and left to drown by Pennsylvanians. Isn't he the victim here?
That is precisely how Cresap saw it, and it is a vital point to make.
Yeah.
How the local government responds to this attack dictates everything that follows. After he is rescued, Cresap does what any citizen would do. He goes to the police.
Or the 1730s equivalent.
Right. He travels to the local Pennsylvania magistrate, a man named Andrew Cornish, looking to swear out a warrant against the men who assaulted him.
And this interaction with Magistrate Cornish is the crucial turning point of the entire war. What actually happens in the magistrate's office.
The magistrate essentially laughs in his face.
Just laughs at him.
Cornish eventually signs warrants, but not before openly mocking Cresap. The magistrate tells Cresap that he knew no reason he had to expect any justice there, since he was a liver in Maryland.
That is stunning. A judge is openly telling a victim of a violent crime that because he claims residency in a different colony, the laws against assault and attempted murder don't apply to him.
It is the total collapse of the judicial system in the disputed zone.
It really is.
When the Lancaster magistrate openly denied Cresap equal protection under the law, it severed the social contract. It gave Cresap the ultimate moral and legal justification to declare himself entirely outside Pennsylvania's jurisdiction.
I mean, if the law doesn't protect you, why should you obey it?
Exactly. From that day forward, Cresap's operating logic was simple. If Pennsylvania law will not protect me, I am not bound by Pennsylvania law.
Wow.
And he had zero obligation to cooperate with their sheriffs, their courts, or their citizens. He became a law unto himself, operating solely under the authority of Maryland.
And from that moment, the violence just spirals out of control. We see a vicious cycle of retaliatory arrests and raids.
It's just constant.
Between 1733 and 1734, it is just constant guerrilla warfare along the river. At one point, a Lancaster sheriff's posse decides they are going to finally arrest Cresap.
They've had enough.
Right. They march to his cabin while he is outside squaring logs with an axe, but they severely underestimate how entrenched he has become.
Oh, drastically. By this time, Cresap has heavily fortified his property. He doesn't just have a cabin, he essentially has a bunker.
He's ready for a siege.
He has 10 armed men inside with him. When the posse arrives, and the depositions claim the posse threatened to hang Cresap and burn his house down with his wife and children inside.
Which is horrifying.
It is. Cresap falls back into the cabin and barricades the heavy door. He taunts the posse, telling them that if they look closely between the logs of the cabin, they will see 11 guns pointed right back at them.
And someone on the outside actually decides to test that theory, right?
Unfortunately, yes. A deputy peeks through the chinking between the logs.
And Cresap instantly fires a gun through the gap.
The shot hits a deputy named Knowles Daunt in the leg, shattering it and mortally wounding him.
And the rest of the posse panics and scatters.
They leave their bleeding deputy on the ground outside the cabin in the dark.
This incident provides us with a profound, terrifying glimpse into the psychological toll this warfare was taking on the families living it. The frontier had just hardened these people.
It really had.
It is one of the darkest details in the entire stack of sources. Someone from the posse eventually creeps back and asks Cresap's wife for a candle so they can at least see in the dark to tend to Deputy Daunt's shattered leg.
Just a basic act of mercy.
But Mrs. Cresap refuses to give them a light. She cries out that not only is she glad the deputy had been hit, but she wished the bullet had hit him in the heart so she could wash her hands in his heart's blood.
It is a chilling statement.
It's terrifying.
But it underscores the grim reality of the situation. After a law enforcement officer's death, there was no going back to a peaceful property dispute over paper charters.
It was no longer a disagreement over ferry licenses or quit rents.
No, blood had been spilled on the soil. Pennsylvania Governor Gordon was outraged and demanded that Maryland arrest Cresap and extradite him for murder.
And how does Maryland's Governor Ogle respond to the news that his land agent just murdered a Pennsylvania deputy?
Governor Ogle responds by officially promoting Thomas Cresap to the rank of captain in the Maryland militia.
That is a staggering escalation. He rewards him.
It is a direct, calculated provocation. By giving Cresap a military commission, Maryland was saying that Cresap's actions were state-sanctioned.
Wow.
The conflict had officially escalated from a local turf war between farmers into a sanctioned military standoff between two sovereign colonies.
That escalation brings us to the summer of 1735, and an event that feels like a surreal movie scene.
It really does.
It is July, and John Wright, the Pennsylvania Quaker who started the first ferry, is out in his field harvesting wheat. Suddenly, Captain Thomas Cresap arrives.
But he doesn't come alone anymore.
No, he brings a militia of 20 armed men, women, and lads. They are marching into the wheat field, beating drums.
Beating drums.
They are wielding drawn swords, cocked pistols, and blunderbusses.
It is a full theatrical show of force. This is psychological warfare.
Cresap marches right up to Wright with a drawn sword in one hand and a cocked pistol in the other, aiming the pistol directly at Wright's chest.
And he announces to the field that he is there to fight the Pennsylvanians and claim the land for Lord Baltimore.
But John Wright is a strict Quaker and a Pennsylvania magistrate. He doesn't pull a weapon.
He doesn't run either.
No. He calmly stands his ground in the middle of his wheat field, looks at this heavily armed, drum-beating militia, and legally commands Cresap, in his capacity as a magistrate, to keep the peace.
And astonishingly, the tension breaks.
Cresap just backs down.
Yes. His men refuse to open fire on an unarmed farmer, and they just turn around and march away.
That is wild.
The Battle of the Wheat Field, as it is sometimes called, is a testament to the strange rules of engagement on this frontier. There's a desperate desire to posture, to intimidate, and to establish authority.
But there was still a deep hesitation to initiate a wholesale, unprovoked slaughter of unarmed neighbors.
Exactly. However, the intimidation tactics only grew larger and more systemic. The following year, in 1736, Maryland escalated things dramatically by sending 300 official militia troops across the river to the Wrightsville area.
300 troops marching into a farming community.
Accompanied by the sheriff of Baltimore. They marched with beat of drum and sound of trumpet, acting as an occupying army.
And they pillaged houses. The sources explicitly note they broke into the homes of the Dutch settlers.
Yes, confiscating everyday items like linen and pewter plates, claiming it was collateral for public dues and unpaid taxes owed to the state of Maryland.
They were essentially legally looting the German farmers to break their spirits.
Which leads to a massive turning point, one that exposes the real loyalties of the frontier.
Okay, let's talk about this. In 1736, Pennsylvania finally secures the official treaty to purchase the land rights from the Six Nations of the Iroquois Confederation. Why did that specific legal mechanism change the tide of the war?
Because it meant Pennsylvania could finally upgrade their paperwork.
Right.
They didn't have to issue those flimsy Blunston license IOUs anymore. They could offer actual, legally binding, permanent land deeds.
The moment this happens, the German squatters analyze their situation. They have been harassed, looted, and caught in a war zone.
The moment Pennsylvania offers them a secure legal title, they immediately renounce their agreements with Thomas Cresap and defect to Pennsylvania en masse.
They just flip sides overnight.
Exactly, because for the everyday settler, this conflict was never about colonial patriotism.
Right, they don't care about Charles II.
No, they didn't have deep emotional loyalty to the Calvert family of Maryland or the Penn family of Pennsylvania. It was purely economic pragmatism.
They sided with whoever could provide them with a stable legal framework so they could farm in peace and leave an inheritance for their children without having their pewter stolen by passing militias.
Makes perfect sense. But Maryland is absolutely infuriated by this mass betrayal.
I bet.
They issue arrest warrants for 60 of these German settlers, labeling them traitors.
But Pennsylvania has finally had enough of playing defense against Thomas Cresap.
They have. In November of 1736, the Lancaster sheriff, Samuel Smith, raises a posse of 24 heavily armed men.
And the sources specifically note that these men were non-Quakers, meaning they were men who had no religious qualms about using lethal violence.
They march to Cresap's cabin and lay siege to it.
This is the fiery climax of Cresap's war.
It really is. The sheriff surrounds the cabin and demands Cresap's surrender to Pennsylvania justice.
Cresap, true to his nature, refuses.
Of course he does. He barricades himself inside with his family and his loyal men. The sheriff tries to negotiate throughout the day. He even offers to let Cresap's wife and children leave the cabin safely before the shooting starts.
But Cresap refuses to let his own family leave. The depositions claim he declared he would rather kill his own family or have them burn in the fire than surrender them to Pennsylvania.
It's incredibly bleak. The standoff lasts from morning until dusk. Finally, the sheriff's men realize Cresap will never come out, so they set the cabin on fire.
Literally burning him out.
As the roof is literally caving in from the flames, Cresap and his men burst out the door, firing their weapons wildly at the sheriff's posse.
In the chaotic shootout, one of Cresap's indentured servants, a man named Laughlin Malone, is killed.
Yes. As his home burns to the ground and his servant falls dead, Cresap makes a desperate break for the river. And this is where we see his sheer physical resilience and tactical cunning.
It plays out like an action movie. He is sprinting for the boats in the dark. The deputies tackle him right at the water's edge before he can launch a canoe.
As they are wrestling in the mud, Cresap manages to shove one of the deputies into the dark water.
Then Cresap screams out at the top of his lungs, "Cresap's getting away!"
The other deputies hear this shout. They see a man splashing frantically in the water in the pitch black, and they start brutally beating their own man with their heavy oars, thinking it is Cresap trying to swim away.
They beat their own deputy until they finally realize they've been tricked.
It is a brilliant, chaotic ruse, but it only buys him a few moments. They do eventually subdue Cresap.
They haul him to Lancaster and fetch a local blacksmith to put him in heavy steel manacles so he can't escape again.
And even after surviving a shootout, having his house burned down, watching a man die, and being dragged through the mud, Cresap isn't broken.
No! When the blacksmith tries to put the irons on him, Cresap punches the blacksmith and knocks him out cold in one blow.
Incredible. They finally get him chained up in steel, throw him in a wagon, and haul him off to Philadelphia.
When they arrive, they parade him through the streets. The Pennsylvanians are treating this like a Roman triumph.
They are treating him like they've captured a mythical beast.
Right. The Maryland monster is finally in chains, but Cresap refuses to give the crowds the satisfaction of seeing him defeated.
Never.
He stands in his chains, looks around at the capital city of his enemies, and famously sneers, "Damn it, this is one of the prettiest towns in Maryland."
It's arguably one of the most famous and defiant quotes of early colonial history.
I love that quote.
And it raises a fascinating question about Cresap's psychology and his worldview.
What does that defiant joke actually reveal about him?
It reveals that he wasn't just a mindless thug or a common frontier criminal looking for a payout. He was a fiercely loyal partisan.
Right.
Even standing in chains, facing the gallows in the capital of his enemies, he truly believed the legal arguments of his employers. He believed, based on that 1632 charter, that he was standing on sovereign Maryland soil.
He was a true believer in the paperwork.
Absolutely.
But the physical reality of a colonial militia burning down a home, killing a servant, and kidnapping a commissioned military officer from a rival colony was a step too far even for the messy frontier.
It was. The news crossed the Atlantic Ocean. The ultimate boss had to step in.
Maryland formally petitions King George II demanding intervention.
And the king is essentially forced to act to stop his own colonies from destroying each other and disrupting the flow of tax revenue back to London.
Can't mess with the money.
Never. On August 18, 1737, King George II issues a royal proclamation ordering an immediate ceasefire. He demands that both governors cease all hostilities, disband their militias, and release their prisoners immediately.
By May of 1738, a formal peace agreement is signed in London by representatives of both colonies.
Right.
And what does this peace agreement actually accomplish on the ground? Do they finally figure out where the 40th parallel is?
Well, no. They don't solve the geographic problem yet. They just establish a provisional boundary line to stop the shooting.
A temporary fix.
Exactly. They agree to draw a temporary line exactly 15 miles south of the southernmost house in Philadelphia.
Okay.
Each side agrees to respect the other's authority on their respective sides of this temporary line until the high courts in London can sort out the mess of the original overlapping charters.
And the legal battle was sent to the Chancery Court. What exactly is the Chancery Court, and why did it take so long? I noticed in the timeline from the sources that it wasn't until 1750 that they made a ruling.
12 years later, the Court of Chancery was a court of equity in England, distinct from common law courts. It dealt with trusts, land law, and complex estate disputes, precisely the kind of mess created by overlapping royal charters.
I bet the lawyers loved it.
Oh, it was notoriously slow, agonizingly bureaucratic, and incredibly expensive. It took 12 years of lawyers arguing over maps, depositions, and 17th century royal intent before the chancellor finally upheld an earlier 1732 agreement between the Penns and the Calverts.
And ultimately, it took until the 1760s for the two colonies to hire Charles Mason and Jeremiah Dixon.
Right, two brilliant British astronomers and surveyors. They were brought to America to mathematically survey the permanent boundary with state-of-the-art equipment.
The creation of the famous Mason-Dixon Line.
Exactly. The macro-historical shift here is profound. What started as an argument over a few dugout canoes and a ferry license on the Susquehanna River forced the British Crown to legally and scientifically define the geography of the American colonies.
It forced the creation of precise borders that we still use today.
He did.
Which raises an incredible thought experiment. What if Maryland had won that court case?
It's fascinating to think about.
Like, what if Lord Baltimore's lawyers had been better? Or if the king had decided to uphold that original 1632 charter to the absolute letter? What if that 40th parallel had been permanently upheld as the border?
If Maryland had won, the geography of American history would be radically altered. Think about the timeline.
Okay.
Philadelphia, the future birthplace of the Declaration of Independence, the site of the Constitutional Convention, the very cradle of the American Revolution, would have been a city in Maryland. The political power dynamics between the colonies would have shifted entirely. Pennsylvania would have been drastically smaller and less influential.
That completely changes the map of the United States.
Furthermore, think about what the Mason-Dixon Line became in the national consciousness.
It became the Great Divider.
It did. Born out of this localized squabble over quit rents and ferry rights, the Mason-Dixon Line later became the profound symbolic and legal divide between the free states of the North and the slaveholding states of the South, leading up to the Civil War.
It's staggering to think about how much history pivoted on that one math error back in the 1680s. The cultural and political implications of exactly where those two surveyors hammered their limestone markers are immeasurable.
Absolutely immeasurable.
But while the border dispute was finally settling into a London courtroom battle, Thomas Cresap's personal story was far from over. Being released from that Philadelphia prison by the king's decree was literally just the end of his first act.
He had a whole other life ahead of him.
When Cresap is released, the provisional boundary has been drawn 15 miles south of Philadelphia. He returns to the Susquehanna River and realizes a bitter truth. His beloved Pleasant Garden property is now officially and permanently located on the Pennsylvania side of the line.
And Cresap is way too stubborn and holds too much of a grudge to ever live as a subject of Pennsylvania.
Right. So he refuses to stay. He packs up his family and moves west, pushing to the absolute edge of the frontier, a place called Old Town, Maryland, situated along the Potomac River.
He builds a massive new fortified trading post on the site of an abandoned Shawnee settlement.
And here, in this new environment, we see an incredible transformation of his character. The man known as the Maryland Monster completely flips his reputation.
He adapts to his new reality beautifully. He becomes a vital conduit for trade and diplomacy with the Native Americans, specifically the Six Nations.
Instead of viewing him as a monster, the Native American tribes give him a new nickname, right?
Yes, they call him Big Spoon.
Big Spoon. I love this detail. Why do they call him that?
Because he was known for always having a giant open iron pot of food ready for any Native American travelers passing through his territory.
That's amazing.
He recognized that out on the deep frontier, diplomacy wasn't about paper charters. It was about hospitality, trade goods, and mutual respect. He becomes renowned for his generosity.
His cabin becomes a legendary waypoint for travelers heading west into the Ohio country.
It does.
In fact, the sources detail a very famous visitor who stopped by in 1747. A 15-year-old surveyor, just starting his career, gets stranded at Cresap's cabin for 5 days due to heavy rains and swollen rivers.
And that teenager was George Washington.
George Washington.
Yes, and young Washington actually writes about this experience in his personal journal. It is a remarkable historical document.
What does he say?
Washington describes sitting at Cresap's trading post and witnessing a war dance performed by a group of 30 Native Americans who were returning from a raid.
Oh, wow.
Washington describes the speaker making a grand speech to recount their victories, the dancers moving in what he called a comical manner, and the musicians playing a specialized instrument.
What kind of instrument?
A drum made from a pot half full of water with a tightly stretched deerskin over the top.
A water pot drum. It's an incredible snapshot of frontier life, and it shows how deeply embedded Cresap was in the indigenous world.
He was a central figure there.
And Cresap keeps building his resume. He helps a Delaware chief named Namacolin blaze a 60-mile trail through the mountains from the Potomac to the Monongahela River.
A route that literally opened the road to the west for British expansion.
But when the French and Indian War breaks out, Cresap's fort becomes the absolute furthest westward point of British control. It becomes a massive staging ground and a target.
General Edward Braddock, the commander of the British forces, actually stops at Cresap's fort with his army in 1755 on their disastrous campaign to fight the French.
But Braddock and his formerly trained British officers absolutely despise Cresap.
They can't stand him.
Why did the British military hate a guy who was essentially their most important forward scout?
It was pure class snobbery. The British regulars viewed the colonial frontiersmen as undisciplined, dirty, and uncivilized.
Just looking down their noses at them.
Exactly. One British officer explicitly writes in his journal that Cresap is a DD rascal and mockingly dubs him the Rattlesnake Colonel.
Rattlesnake Colonel. That was meant as an insult.
A severe insult. The implication was that on the barbaric colonial frontier, any lowly, uneducated militiaman could earn the rank of colonel just by wandering in the woods and killing a rattlesnake.
Wow.
They viewed him as an uncultured savage who lived in a dirt floor log cabin.
But modern archaeology has completely upended that British stereotype, hasn't it?
Completely. Between 2008 and 2010, the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal National Historical Park conducted a massive archaeological survey.
And they finally located the exact site of Cresap's fort in a hayfield south of Old Town.
Right. And what they dug out of the ground completely changes the narrative of who this man was. They excavated over 200 artifacts dating from 1740 to 1770.
And the material culture they uncovered is fascinating because of the contrast it presents.
It really is. They found the things you would expect at a frontier fort-led shot, gun flints, hand-wrought nails, pieces of muskets.
Normal frontier stuff.
But beneath the soil, they also found a treasure trove of high-end imported luxury goods.
Luxury goods. Like what?
They unearthed fragments of Delftware, fine oriental porcelain, white salt-glazed stoneware imported from Europe, and intricate Rhenish blue and gray stoneware.
They even found a paste gemstone, right? Probably from a fancy gentleman's button or a shoe buckle.
Yes. This archaeological evidence completely shatters the myth of Cresap as an uncultured, dirt-poor savage.
These artifacts prove he was a wealthy, highly connected colonial gentleman.
He was a founding member of the Ohio Company, engaging in massive, lucrative land speculation alongside men like George Washington's brothers.
So he was deeply embedded in the global trade network, sitting in a log fort on the edge of the known wilderness, dining off imported Oriental porcelain.
Exactly.
I just love the paradox of his nicknames. It perfectly encapsulates his chaotic life.
It really does sum him up perfectly.
To the Pennsylvanians whose barns he burned, he is forever the Maryland monster.
To the British Army officers who thought he was beneath them, he is the rattlesnake colonel.
To the Native Americans who traded with him and ate at his table, he is the generous big spoon.
And to the patriots in the Revolutionary War, because, amazingly, he lived to be 93 years old and actually formed a local Sons of Liberty chapter in his 80s, he is a celebrated American frontier hero.
Thomas Cresap's life is a masterclass in the complexity of historical perspective. History so often tries to flatten people into simple, easily digestible categories.
They are either the noble hero or the wicked villain.
But Cresap defies that flattening. He was a man intensely loyal to his localized interests.
He shifted his allegiances from the Calvert family to the British Crown, to the Native Americans, to the American revolutionaries, based on what benefited his immediate reality and his deeply held convictions about his land and his rights.
Which brings us to the end of our journey today. Let's recap what we've unpacked from this incredible stack of sources.
We covered a lot of ground.
We started with a botched 17th century map drawn by men who had never seen America that accidentally placed the future city of Philadelphia in Maryland.
That clerical error birthed a bitter rivalry over a few dugout canoes on a river ferry.
That economic rivalry escalated into a guerrilla war of blazing cabins, stolen pewter, and armed militias in the Conococheague Valley.
It took a decree from the King of England himself and a decade in a London court to stop the bloodshed, ultimately resulting in the surveying of the Mason-Dixon Line.
And at the center of it all was Thomas Cresap, a man who fought a brutal war for a border that ended up leaving him behind.
He is a remarkable sequence of events, showing how abstract lines on paper dictate the physical reality of human lives.
And I want to tie it all back to the sources you shared with us and to that unassuming 40th parallel marker standing on the grassy verge of Route 441 in Washington Borough.
Yes, back to the beginning.
When you drive past it now, remember that it isn't just a rusted sign. It is a monument to a time when lines on a map bled into the real world. It's a reminder of how much heavy, violent, and world-shaping historical weight is hidden in plain sight along an everyday highway.
And it leaves us with a final, lingering reality to ponder.
What's that?
The strategy Lord Baltimore used, moving vulnerable people into a disputed zone to establish facts on the ground, is a geopolitical tactic that didn't end in the 18th century. We see demographic manipulation used to force political borders in global conflicts to this very day.
That is so true.
This entire colonial war was fought over an invisible line drawn by absent powers who had never seen the land, yet everyday people bled for it. It makes you wonder, what invisible, outdated lines, whether political, cultural, or geographical, are we still fighting over today, without even realizing who drew them in the first place, or how broken their compass truly was?
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Uncharted Lancaster podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating or review wherever you listen. It really helps more people discover the show. For more fascinating local history, visit unchartedlancaster.com. And if you'd like to go deeper, check out one of Adam Zern's books at unchartedlancaster.com/books. Until next time, keep exploring.